All right, let's shift gears, folks. Let me give you a little update on what's going on in the war in Ukraine. Let me share my entire screen, that screen there, and let's have a little checkers of what's going on the map, which is pretty interesting for a couple of days now, maybe a week or so now. It looks like the Ukrainians, that is, have pushed across the river in the south from Kherson here, and they're now holding the ground here in the muddy, swampy area. The Russians have been using aviation to attack the Ukrainians there, but it doesn't seem to be going well. And there seems to be a whole lot of footage coming out now as well of Ukrainian troops being able to get across the river here. So they're going to get across in scale. And I think one of the attack vectors is going to be there in the south in Kherson, and the other attack vector is going to be up here from Zaporizhzhia. They're going to go to Melitopol here and cut them off. That's what they're going to do. Even though the Russians are dug in here extensively, I think concentrating the forces and the troops down in this part of the world will be the way that it actually happens. And they'll have a pincer movement that comes across here to cut off Crimea. And in the process, they'll take out the bridge. So that's looking more and more likely on a daily basis. Over here in the eastern part of Ukraine, of course, we have the ongoing battle over here in Bakhmut to the north. I just can't scroll in with my mouse wheel because it goes nuts for some reason here on this map. You can see the Wagner forces have taken just about all of the town now as well. So we're on the very western edge of the town here. And if you look at the timeline of what's going on, folks, if you want to see this map, it's just a deepstatemap.live. I'll put the link in the description for you as well. There's a lot of information on this map. You can go back a couple of days like this by just clicking on their tools. You can see they're just etching along just ever so slightly, just holding the ground. Urban combat is the single hardest thing you could do as an infantry soldier. Usually works on a 10-to-1 ratio, meaning the attacking force will need 10 people for every one defender there. And the attacking force will generally lose 5 to 6 people for every one person loss on the defending side. In urban combat, it's the most difficult, intensive type of logistics operation you can do as well. That's why this logistics war has been such a big thing. And the crossroads here at Kramatorsk has been a problem for the Ukrainians for some time. But now the ground has hardened a little bit. They're able to kind of make their way back to Chasiv Yar here. I doubt that the Russians are going to get much further here because there's quite a bit of high ground here. So that's going to be a bit of a non-starter for the Russians there. But it's estimated now that more than 100,000 Russian troops have been killed and destroyed here in Bakhmut, trying to take this little one-horse town, which just seems absolutely crazy to me. There's been rumors as well for a little while now that the Ukrainians were going to attract Beleaguered here. They were going to put their offensive forces, roll across the border into Russia, for heaven's sake, and take the ground here, and then hold that hostage until you get the hell out of Crimea. Then we'll give you that back and then make it happen that way. But I think that's a bit of propaganda that's going on there. It's a bit interesting scenario to see what's happening. My view is that if you've got 100,000 odd troops, it's going to be very, very hard to hide those troops and to hide all of the equipment associated with the troops in the open. So moving it to the north of the country there is not likely, but hiding the troops and equipment down here and over here in Zaporizhzhia will be relatively straightforward. And you're outside the ranges of Russian Su-25 attack aircraft and from their armored brigades as well, because a lot of their armor had been destroyed in this part of the world. So I think the counterattack is on the verge of happening down here in Kherson, down here in Zaporizhzhia. They're going to come down here to the middle and cut them off. If you don't know, the Zaporizhzhia power plant, folks, is right here in the guts, just here. That's where the power plant is. We now know that the Russians have, from images that we've seen, and it's not propaganda, we see Russian troops and equipment on the roof of the power plants. So it's unbelievable. There's these, there's 7 buildings and they've got troops and equipment on the top there. So the Russians are planning to lob artillery or mortars or shooting from those places at the advancing Ukrainian troops. And it doesn't make any sense that they would do something like that, because they're just going to have a drone flown into their face and that will make that all go away in an asymmetric warfare type scenario. So we're on the verge in the next couple of days of this all coming to a giant crescendo and something big happening. If Putin loses Crimea, then he will lose all of Russia. I think the whole thing will come undone. This bridge is going to go away. They're going to divide them in two. And I think maybe once that happens, what we're going to see is a capitulation of the Ukrainians, letting this go to the Russians, and maybe some of this, maybe we get Mariupol back and we come to this line where we were. You know, the conditions that the Ukrainians have said for the end of the war is all Russians to leave pre-2014 borders, which means all of this red stuff goes away. But that's not going to happen, and I think maybe they might end up giving up this ground, and this happening here. This is the last throw of the dice, folks. If something doesn't go quite right here with the Ukrainian counteroffensive, I think what will happen is some desperate things will happen from the Ukrainian side to try and draw NATO into the war, which is pretty scary. So the combat losses for the Russians continue to mount. I haven't done one of these for a little while, but you can see just yesterday, more than 650 troops were either killed or wounded in action from the Russian side. I don't know how true any of this is. Take it with a grain of salt because it's published by the Ukrainians, and they've been publishing this from the start. And what they're trying to do is to show you, they're going to try and show you what this is actually costing the Russians and what a ridiculous thing it actually is. Overnight, there was a series of missile strikes fired at Ukrainian. In total, there was 23 missiles fired, and 2 of them got through. So the air defense system is working incredibly well there for the Ukrainians. 2 got through, but not a bad result, I have to say. And I don't think anybody was hurt or killed or injured as a result of those airstrikes yesterday. But imagine living in a country and there was 23 cruise missiles fired at you. That's a pretty scary proposition and a pretty serious thing. So personnel losses there, we're approaching 200,000 people. All of the armored combat vehicles, 7,000, 3,700 tanks, 3,000 artillery pieces, 300 aircraft, that's more than the Australian Air Force, 294 helicopters, that's more than the entire Australian Defence Force, and 18 ships and boats, and more of that's going to happen. I just want to draw your attention to this figure here for a second. So 3,734 tanks destroyed. Yesterday was the May Day parade in Russia, where they celebrate a victory day in Europe, where the Soviets took back Europe from the Nazis. And normally what they would have is this T-34 tank here being flanked by all of the other Russian tanks and armored equipment. So I'm just going to play this video just for a second, just to show you that there's virtually no equipment on display. And, you know, there's one reason or another. They're at war. That's the first thing. But they have this one tank, which is normally flanked by the T-14 Armadas, the T-90s, the T-80s. But there's nothing else there. There's literally no equipment that comes onto this parade ground in front of all of these people. Traditionally, we're seeing everything. We're seeing everything that the Russian military has, their entire arsenals, their everything. But we're not seeing hardly anything. And the reason I hypothesize is it's either in combat or it's been destroyed here in a place like this. So it's a funny thing that's going on there in Russia. And I also